Momoshiki hasn't agreed to Boruto's deal yet. Yeah, I'm Nim without the E. For the next 8 minutes, let's talk a bit about Momoshiki and Boruto. And if we take a quick look back at the end of chapter 28, there's an interesting fact that sparks several assumptions. Starting from the upgraded sword effect, the resonance, or even the simple possibility that it was entirely Boruto's own will, without any outside intervention, that triggered his karma. Because as we know, there are several factors that trigger Boruto's karma to activate. But in this latest case, that sword also becomes one of those factors. In other words, it seems difficult to ignore the idea that the sword slightly absorbed Boruto's chakra without causing any side effects or anything else. Meaning, with a confirmation that hasn't been explained, especially regarding its weaknesses, sooner or later there will definitely be some plot twist revealing the sword's hidden drawbacks. And one of them is exactly what I mentioned earlier. With the fact that the sword absorbs Boruto's chakra, we can't just underestimate it, because even if it only absorbs a little, if the effect continues, Boruto will eventually face a huge consequence. And one of them is, of course, his chakra running out. And if that happens, Momoshiki will easily take over Boruto's body. However, in the case where we know Boruto has already made a deal with Momoshiki, does that mean when Boruto runs out of chakra, Momoshiki will take full control of his body? Or perhaps even if Momoshiki tries to possess him, Boruto will still be able to maintain his consciousness. But if that's truly what's happening, then that means Momoshiki will return soon, possibly even in chapter 29. Believe it or not, this makes perfect sense and can be considered supporting evidence. I mean, we know that previously Boruto tried extremely hard to prevent Momoshiki from possessing him and controlling his body. And as shown in the chapters after the time skip, especially during the epic fight, where Sasuke and Boruto faced Code and were ultimately cornered, leading to Sasuke being defeated and turned into a tree. In that moment, Boruto had no other choice but to activate his karma for the first time to defeat Code. But unfortunately, before the fight even happened, Boruto suddenly felt as if he was no longer himself, but Momoshiki instead. And because of that, Boruto stopped using karma, so Momoshiki wouldn't be able to take control again. This fear is completely understandable because every time Momoshiki takes over his body, there are always serious consequences that follow. But on the other hand, if we look at when Boruto fought Mamushi in Konoha village, it's clear that Boruto used the power of karma of his own free will, not because he was forced to by circumstances. And one thing that remains a question mark in this battle is Mamushi's fire technique. And as you can see, when Mamushi releases the fire element from his mouth, it's not a situation where Boruto can die easily. In other words, there are so many alternatives for him to avoid that attack, right? Moreover, Konoha village has so many locations where Koji the Toad holds the metal that Boruto possesses. This means it would certainly make it easier for Boruto to avoid it instantly with Hirai Shin. Additionally, Kawaki is not near Boruto, which usually triggers resonance, activating Boruto's karma when Kawaki activates his own. And yeah, this naturally raises the question, why did Boruto choose to use the karma he's been avoiding all this time, instead of simply escaping with Hirai Shin? And again, regardless of the final outcome in chapter 29, according to some scenarios, this could fully explain what happened to Boruto himself. However, I'm not claiming that this is 100% correct. That means if you have a different perspective, let me know. So yeah, first and foremost, Momoshiki is controlling Boruto's body. And of course, all of this started when Momoshiki became the cover character for Blue Vortex chapter 26. In other words, there is a hint or clue that I'm sure most people didn't notice in the titles of each chapter starting from chapter 26. For example, chapter 26 is titled Those Like-Minded. And as we know, every character who is on the cover of a chapter is a character who plays an important role in that chapter, like in chapter 27. With Inojin on the cover, of course, the content of the chapter reveals that Inojin has successfully mastered a new jutsu that is very important for dealing with Mamushi's abilities. But there is something strange about chapter 26. The cover features Momoshiki, but Momoshiki does not appear in any panel. And yeah, I'm sure we all agree that chapter 26 really shows something that is still full of question marks, especially if we pay attention to the scene where Boruto, Kashin Koji, and Inojin are talking to each other. This is where so many assumptions and speculations begin. And even though in chapter 26, there isn't a single moment where Boruto contacts Momoshiki or moves to Momoshiki's spiritual dimension, it doesn't rule out the possibility of revealing the continuation of the scene between Momoshiki and Boruto. but the majority can already determine or assess Boruto's attitude and especially his pose, which at least shows a sign that is very similar to Momoshiki himself. However, behind all the speculation and opinions, this cannot be fully proven. In chapter 25, Boruto tells Momoshiki that he wants Momoshiki to lend him his power, not control his consciousness. In other words, what we have seen does not fully represent that it is Momoshiki. And regarding the chain of titles from chapter 26 to 28, in the end, those who are like-minded and brave enough to bet their lives are the ones who awaken a new power. And Boruto? He is the clearest proof of that. So in other words, Boruto's new power could become the savior, or the neutralizer of Momoshiki's karma, or even the opposite. Yeah, you know what I mean. Just like I said before, a double-edged sword. And if we return to the main topic of the final scene in chapter 28, the last possibility is that Boruto and Momoshiki are sharing consciousness. And yeah, since Boruto has fully become an Otsutsuki, the bond between him and Momoshiki seems to have changed. And not only that, because Momoshiki also gave up the opportunity to reincarnate by giving up his karma data to save Boruto's life, their relationship is now similar to Naruto and Kurama. And as an analogy, sooner or later, a similar concept will be revealed when Naruto obtained Kurama's power without Kurama's consent. After training with Killer Bee, Naruto was able to use Kurama's chakra without Kurama's prior consent. But that power remains a double-edged sword. If Naruto is unaware and his chakra is completely absorbed by Kurama, Naruto will die. And now, the chase between Naruto and Kurama is exactly the same as Momoshiki and Boruto. In other words, regardless of how this method of borrowing power occurs, one thing is certain: Boruto will be given a time limit in using Momoshiki's power. Yeah, that's at least what we can conclude if the main reference is Naruto and Kurama. And as a final conclusion, regarding this active karma, there are three possibilities. The first is the effect of Mamushi's attack, which Boruto was forced to absorb in order to protect Konoha. Even though we know that Boruto could have avoided it with Hiraishin, I think that by choosing to absorb the flames produced by Mamushi's attack to protect the village, this will have a major impact on Boruto himself. This means that starting from this action, there will be a big consideration between Konoha and Boruto, who is still considered a criminal. And even the elders of Konoha have suspected that everything Boruto knows is a plan to destroy Konoha from within. And this action should certainly have a very positive impact. Second, even though we can't be sure how much of Boruto's chakra is being absorbed by that sword, little by little but continuously, the fact remains that if Boruto runs out of chakra, it will trigger Momoshiki to possess his body. And one of the signs of that is karma activating. Third, let's say that really is Momoshiki. Then is it possible that Boruto and Momoshiki are actually sharing one consciousness within a single soul? For this case, I'd really like to hear your thoughts. So yeah, thank you for watching. I'm Nim without the E. See you in the next video. Bye-bye, Data Bio.